May 8, 1886, Atlanta, Georgia, a city rebuilding itself after the Civil War. On this spring day, in a modest backyard laboratory, a Confederate veteran and pharmacist was about to create something that would eventually be consumed more than 1.9 billion times a day across the globe. This is the story of Coca-Cola, and it begins with a man named Dr. John Stith Pemberton. Born on January 8, 1831, in Knoxville, Georgia, John Stith Pemberton was no ordinary pharmacist. At just 19 years old, he earned his medical degree from the Reform Medical College of Georgia in Macon. But Pemberton's true passion wasn't practicing medicine, it was chemistry and pharmaceutical innovation. After establishing his own drugstore in Columbus, Georgia, Pemberton's life changed forever during the Civil War. Fighting for the Confederate Army, he rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. But in April 1865, during the Battle of Columbus, Pemberton suffered a devastating saber wound to his chest, an injury that would plague him for the rest of his life. Like many veterans of his era, Pemberton turned to morphine to manage his chronic pain. This addiction would shadow him until his death, but it also drove him to experiment relentlessly with various painkillers and medicinal compounds. In a tragic irony, his search for relief from suffering would lead to one of history's most celebrated beverages. By the 1880s, Pemberton had moved to Atlanta and opened the Pemberton Chemical Company. He was already known for creating various patent medicines, products that promised to cure everything from headaches to nervous disorders. In 1885, Pemberton introduced Pemberton's French wine coca, an alcoholic beverage made from wine, coca leaves, and cola nuts. It was inspired by Vin Mariani, an extremely popular coca-based wine created in Paris in 1863. Pemberton's version was prescribed as a cure for nervous disorders, headaches, and other ailments, what people of the era called neurasthenia. The drink was a modest success, but fate and politics were about to force Pemberton's hand. In November 1885, Atlanta's growing temperance movement achieved a significant victory. Fulton County passed legislation prohibiting the sale of alcohol. For Pemberton, this was a crisis. His popular French wine coca could no longer be sold legally. But where others saw disaster, Pemberton saw opportunity. If he couldn't sell alcohol, he would create something entirely new, a temperance drink that captured the appeal of his original formula without the wine. In his backyard laboratory, Pemberton worked feverishly in a brass kettle, mixing and remixing his formula. He removed the wine and began experimenting with various combinations of oils, sugar, citric acid, coca leaf extract, and cola nut, a rich source of caffeine. The result was a thick, dark syrup with a unique, intriguing flavor. On May 8, 1886, Pemberton carried a jug of his new syrup down the street to Jacob's Pharmacy on Peachtree Street in downtown Atlanta. There, pharmacist Willis Venable mixed the syrup with carbonated water, a popular method of serving drinks at soda fountains. The first customers sampled it. The verdict? Excellent. The new drink was immediately placed on sale for 5 cents a glass. It was marketed as a brain tonic, a remedy for headaches, mental fatigue, and indigestion. The promise was simple. This drink was delicious and refreshing. Coca-Cola was born. But what to call this new creation? That task fell to Pemberton's bookkeeper and business partner, Frank Mason Robinson. Robinson had a keen eye for marketing. He suggested the name Coca-Cola, referencing the drink's 2 active ingredients, coca leaves and cola nuts. But Robinson didn't stop there. Believing that the 2 C's would look well in advertising, he personally crafted the distinctive flowing script logo, the very same cursive design that remains one of the most recognized trademarks in the world today, more than 130 years later. The first newspaper advertisement for Coca-Cola appeared in the Atlanta Journal on May 29, 1886. It invited thirsty citizens to try the new and popular soda fountain drink, describing it as delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. Pemberton invested heavily in marketing. Hand-painted oilcloth signs reading Coca-Cola appeared on store awnings throughout Atlanta, with the word drink added to make it clear this was a beverage. Thousands of coupons for free sample drinks were distributed. Posters went up on every streetcar in the city, but success didn't come overnight. During the first year, Coca-Cola sales averaged just 9 drinks per day. Pemberton spent $70 on supplies and advertising, but earned back only $50. By any measure, it was a commercial failure. Still, Pemberton believed in his creation. He was convinced that someday it would become a national drink. Tragically, John Stith Pemberton would never see his prediction come true. Suffering from stomach cancer and increasingly dependent on morphine, Pemberton's health rapidly deteriorated. Desperate for money to cover medical expenses and his addiction, he began selling off portions of his business to various partners. In 1888, Pemberton sold his remaining interest in Coca-Cola to fellow Atlanta pharmacist Asa Candler for just $300, about $9,300 in today's money. On August 16, 1888, at the age of 57, John Stith Pemberton died. He was poor, addicted, and largely unaware of what his creation would become. When Atlanta druggists heard of his death, they closed their stores to attend his funeral. He was buried in Linwood Cemetery in Columbus, Georgia. The man who created Coca-Cola never lived to see it become one of the most valuable brands on earth. But his formula, that mysterious blend of flavors mixed in a brass kettle on a spring day in 1886, was just beginning its journey to global dominance. Enter Asa Candler, a man who would transform Coca-Cola from a failing soda fountain drink into a national phenomenon. Born in 1851 in Villa Rica, Georgia, Candler was a devout Methodist, a shrewd businessman, and above all, a marketing genius decades ahead of his time. The exact details of how Candler acquired Coca-Cola remain somewhat murky, tangled in conflicting accounts and legal disputes. What is clear is this. Between 1888 and 1891, Candler systematically purchased the rights to Coca-Cola from Pemberton's heirs and various business partners. The total investment, just $2,300, roughly $64,000 in today's currency. On May 1, 1889, Candler published a full-page advertisement in the Atlanta Journal, boldly proclaiming his business as sole proprietors of Coca-Cola, delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. While he didn't technically achieve sole ownership until 1891, Candler was already acting like he owned the world's most valuable beverage, and in a sense, he did. What Asa Candler did next would revolutionize American business forever. He didn't just sell a product, he sold an experience, a lifestyle, a piece of happiness in a glass. In 1891, when most business owners viewed advertising as wasteful spending, Candler invested $11,000 of his early Coca-Cola profits into marketing, over $300,000 in today's money. This was unprecedented. His competitors thought he was insane. Candler's strategy was saturation. He wanted the Coca-Cola name everywhere, constantly, unavoidably. He ordered 45,000 calendars emblazoned with the red Coca-Cola logo in his first year alone. He shipped metal serving trays to every drugstore that stocked his syrup. Each month his team painted fresh Coca-Cola signs on the sides of brick buildings across Atlanta, coating them in the signature Spencerian script. He distributed coupons for free glasses of Coca-Cola, a revolutionary concept in the 1890s that would become standard business practice worldwide. And while his competitors relied solely on newspaper listings of their tonic's medicinal ingredients, Candler crafted full-page advertisements showing smiling people drinking Coca-Cola at soda fountains. The message was clear. This wasn't medicine. This was joy in a glass. His marketing blitz worked spectacularly. By 1895, Coca-Cola was served in every state in the United States. Annual sales jumped from 9,000 gallons of syrup in 1891 to 76,000 gallons in 1895. The average American saw the Coca-Cola logo 12 times per day. In drugstores that once stocked dozens of interchangeable cola drinks, Coca-Cola was now the star. Customers walked in asking for Coca-Cola by name. By 1900, 97% of Atlanta residents could recognize the Coca-Cola logo instantly, a level of brand recognition that wouldn't be matched by any other product for decades. By 1892, Candler's entrepreneurial instincts told him it was time to formalize the operation. With his brother John S. Candler, Frank Robinson, and two other associates, he formed a Georgia corporation named the Coca-Cola Company. Initial capitalization was $100,000. The trademark Coca-Cola, used in the marketplace since 1886, was registered in the United States Patent Office on January 31, 1893. The brand was now legally protected. As demand for Coca-Cola increased, the company quickly outgrew its facilities. A new building erected in 1898 was the first headquarters devoted exclusively to the production of syrup and the management of the business. Candler proudly hailed the new three-story structure as sufficient for all our needs for all time to come. It was inadequate in just over a decade. Candler understood something that most businessmen of his era didn't. People buy from people they admire. So he pioneered the celebrity endorsement. In the early 1900s, Candler contracted actress and singer Hilda Clark to be the face of Coca-Cola, initiating one of the first ever celebrity endorsements in American advertising. Her elegant image appeared on calendars, serving trays, and posters across the nation. Soon after, noted opera singer Lillian Nordica began endorsing Coca-Cola in nationwide advertising in 1905. The message these beautiful, successful, refined women sent was powerful. Coca-Cola wasn't just for common laborers or sick people seeking medicine. It was sophisticated. It was aspirational. It was for everyone. But Candler's success story had a troubling chapter. The drink's name wasn't just clever marketing, it was literal. Coca-Cola originally contained small amounts of cocaine from the coca leaf extract in Pemberton's formula. As awareness of cocaine's addictive properties grew in the early 1900s, Candler faced mounting pressure. In 1903, he made a crucial decision. He would remove the alkaloid cocaine from the coca leaves before mixing them with the drink. The extracted cocaine would be sold to pharmaceutical companies for legitimate medical use. The timing was perfect. Just 3 years later, Congress would pass the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, requiring accurate labeling of product contents. Candler's proactive move protected Coca-Cola from potential legal disaster and allowed the company to focus purely on being a refreshment beverage, not a medicine. Interestingly, Candler, a devout Methodist who objected strongly to alcohol consumption, also hated the slang terms people used for his product, coke and dope. He fought against these nicknames for years, ultimately losing the battle. By 1920, Coke had become so ubiquitous that the company eventually embraced it as an official trademark. While Candler focused relentlessly on boosting soda fountain sales, a concept was developing that would change everything. In 1894, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, a man named Joseph A. Biedenhahn was so impressed by the growing demand for Coca-Cola at his soda fountain that he installed bottling machinery in the rear of his store. He began selling cases of bottled Coca-Cola to farms and lumber camps up and down the Mississippi River. Joseph Biedenhahn became the first person to bottle Coca-Cola, but Candler, the marketing genius, completely missed the potential. He viewed bottling as a distraction from the fountain business. He believed Coca-Cola's future was in drugstores and soda fountains, not portable bottles. This blind spot would become one of the most expensive mistakes in business history. In 1899, two Chattanooga lawyers named Benjamin F. Thomas and Joseph B. Whitehead traveled to Atlanta with a proposition. They wanted to bottle and sell Coca-Cola throughout most of the United States. Candler, still convinced that bottling was a passing fad, agreed to sell them the exclusive rights for $1. $1 for the entire United States. It's difficult to overstate how catastrophic this decision was for the Candler family's future wealth. That single dollar contract would eventually be worth billions, but in Candler's defense, he couldn't have predicted what would happen next. Thomas and Whitehead, along with another Chattanoogan named John T. Lupton, began developing what would become the worldwide Coca-Cola bottling system. The first bottling plant under the new contract opened in Chattanooga in 1899, the second in Atlanta the following year. Realizing they couldn't raise enough capital to build bottling operations nationwide themselves, the trio decided to contract with competent individuals to establish Coca-Cola bottling operations within defined geographic areas. Over the next 20 years, the number of plants grew from 2 to more than 1,000, 95% of them locally owned and operated. By 1928, the volume of Coca-Cola sold in bottles would exceed that sold through soda fountains. Candler's distraction had become the primary business model. Success breeds imitation, and Coca-Cola's spectacular rise spawned an army of copycats. Companies with names like Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, Coke, and dozens of others flooded the market, using similar scripts, similar bottles, and similar tasting beverages. The bottlers faced a serious problem. All colas were sold in identical straight-sided bottles. Once the bottles were stored in barrels of ice water at stores, paper labels would fall off. Customers couldn't tell which bottle was genuine Coca-Cola and which was a cheap imitation. Early advertising warned of the perils of popularity. Demand the genuine and accept no substitutes reminded consumers to settle for nothing less than the real thing. But warnings weren't enough. The company needed something more distinctive, something that couldn't be copied. They needed a bottle that was unmistakably Coca-Cola. As Coca-Cola made him a millionaire, Candler diversified his interests. He invested heavily in real estate and banking. He developed the Druid Hills neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, which remains one of the city's most prestigious areas today. In 1906, he completed the Candler Building, then Atlanta's tallest building at 17 stories. With intricately carved decorations, it housed both the headquarters of the Coca-Cola Company and his central bank and trust company. The building still stands at Peachtree and Auburn Streets, listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Candler buildings sprung up across America, in Baltimore, Kansas City, and New York, monuments to the fortune built on a 5-cent glass of brown, fizzy water. Asa Candler's great wealth enabled him to make large donations, frequently to projects sponsored by his Methodist denomination. His younger brother, Warren Asa Candler, a Methodist bishop, advised him in these matters. His most significant gift came in 1914, when he donated $1 million and 75 acres of land to help establish Emory University in Atlanta. His gifts to Emory would eventually total more than $8 million, an extraordinary act of generosity that transformed higher education in the South. He also funded Wesley Memorial Hospital, churches, and countless other charitable causes. Candler believed that wealth carried responsibility. He had been blessed, and he intended to bless others in return. In 1916, Candler stepped from the Coca-Cola boardroom into Atlanta's City Hall, successfully running for mayor as a reform candidate. At this point, he handed over control of most of his business enterprises, including the Coca-Cola Company, to his children, retaining active control only of central bank and trust. As mayor, Candler faced enormous challenges. He sorted out Atlanta's chaotic fiscal situation, cleaning up the city's finances. Then in 1917, disaster struck. The Great Atlanta Fire consumed more than 1,500 homes. Candler led the city's struggle to control the destruction and recover from the damage, working tirelessly to coordinate relief efforts. That same year, the United States entered World War I. Atlantans hoped their city would be chosen as the location of Camp Gordon, a military training facility. This became possible only because Candler made large personal loans to facilitate the construction of water and sewer services to the site. His financial intervention brought thousands of soldiers and millions of dollars to Atlanta's economy. However, Candler's tenure as mayor was also controversial. Driven by his strict Methodist beliefs, he enforced rigid prohibition laws and strengthened racial segregation ordinances, policies that reflected the deep prejudices of the era and his own personal convictions. By 1919, Candler's children made a decision that would shock the business world. Without consulting their father extensively, they sold the family's controlling interest in the Coca-Cola Company to a consortium of investors led by banker Ernest Woodruff. The price? $25 million, the largest financial transaction in the history of the South at that time. Candler was reportedly devastated. The company he had built, the brand he had made famous, was no longer his. Some historians believe his children sold because they feared the federal government might break up the company under antitrust laws. Others suggest they simply saw an opportunity to diversify their wealth. Whatever the reason, the Candler era at Coca-Cola was over. In his final years, Candler faced personal turmoil. After his first wife's death, he became engaged to a New Orleans socialite but broke the engagement. She unsuccessfully sued him for breach of promise. In 1922, he also sold Central Bank and Trust. In June 1924, he married May Little Reagan, a widowed public stenographer. The marriage was unhappy. He filed for divorce but dropped the suit. In failing health, Asa Candler arranged to give the last remnants of his fortune to Emory University, keeping only enough to live on. He suffered a disabling stroke in 1926. On March 12, 1929, Asa Griggs Candler died at the age of 77. The man who had turned a $2,300 investment into an empire, who had pioneered modern advertising, and who had made Coca-Cola a household name, was gone. But his legacy, the marketing strategies, the brand recognition, the distribution network, would propel Coca-Cola into its next chapter, global dominance. The turn of the 20th century marked a revolution in how Americans consumed beverages. Refrigeration was becoming more common. Automobiles were replacing horses. Americans were more mobile than ever before, and they wanted their refreshments to be mobile too. By 1915, Coca-Cola was being bottled in hundreds of plants across the United States. The bottling system that Thomas, Whitehead, and Lupton had created was spectacularly successful. Each bottler operated independently within their territory, investing their own capital, hiring local workers, and building relationships with local merchants. This decentralized system would become one of Coca-Cola's greatest strengths. Local bottlers understood their communities. They knew the shop owners, the festivals, the high school football games. They made Coca-Cola feel like a local product, even as it became a national brand. But the bottlers faced one persistent serious problem. They couldn't tell their product apart from the imitators. By 1915, the imitation problem had reached crisis proportions. Dozens of cola companies were selling drinks with confusingly similar names: Coca-Nola, Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, and many more. They used similar scripts, similar advertising, and sold their products in identical straight-sided bottles. Coca-Cola had tried using distinctive diamond-shaped labels in 1906, but the labels had a fatal flaw. Stores kept soda bottles in big buckets of ice water to keep them cold. The paper labels would soak off, leaving the bottles indistinguishable. Some imitators even copied the diamond label design. Legal battles erupted constantly, draining resources and energy. The bottlers were frustrated. Consumers were confused. Something had to change. On April 26, 1915, the trustees of the Coca-Cola Bottling Association voted to expend up to $500 to develop a distinctive bottle for Coca-Cola. They sent a design brief to around 10 glass companies across the country. The challenge was simple to state, but extraordinarily difficult to execute. Create a bottle so distinct that you would recognize it by feel in the dark or lying broken on the ground. The Root Glass Company in Terre Haute, Indiana, received the brief and assigned the project to shop foreman Alexander Samuelson. Samuelson assembled a small team that included staff machinist Earl R. Dean and his co-worker Clyde Edwards. Dean and Edwards went to the Terre Haute Public Library to research the coca plant and cola nut, hoping their shapes would provide inspiration for a distinctive bottle design. They searched through encyclopedias and botanical references. They found very little about the coca plant. But then, by chance or by fate, they came across an image of something else entirely: the cocoa pod. Not coca. Cocoa, the source of chocolate. The encyclopedia illustration showed the pod's distinctive curved shape, with deep vertical ribs running along its length. Dean immediately saw the potential. Within hours, he had sketched a bottle design incorporating the cocoa pod's ribbed texture and curved silhouette. The design was revolutionary. Nothing like it existed in the beverage industry. Samuelson quickly approved the design and oversaw the creation of sample molds. But there was a problem. Dean's first prototype was too curvy. The diameter of the base was smaller than the middle of the bottle, which meant it would topple over on conveyor belts. The bottles wouldn't fit into existing bottling machines either. Dean went back to the drawing board and created a modified design. He widened the base and slimmed down the middle, giving the bottle better balance while preserving its distinctive curves. This refined design would become the most famous bottle in the world. On November 16, 1915, the Root Glass Company received a patent for the contour bottle design under Samuelson's name. But here's the fascinating detail. The patent submission included no Coca-Cola branding whatsoever, no script logo, no mention of Coke in the application. This was intentional. The company wanted to keep the design absolutely secret from the copycat cola manufacturers until it was ready for production. The element of surprise was crucial. In early 1916, a committee composed of bottlers and Coca-Cola company officials met in Atlanta to evaluate the competing designs from various glass manufacturers. The Root Glass Company's contour bottle was the clear winner. It wasn't even close. The bottle's curves were elegant yet functional. The vertical ribs provided texture and grip. Most importantly, the shape was absolutely unmistakable. Even in the dark, even broken into pieces on the ground, you could identify it as Coca-Cola. The contract specified that the bottles would be colored with German green glass, a distinctive hue that would later be renamed Georgia Green in homage to the home state of the Coca-Cola Company. The bottle quickly gained affectionate nicknames. One of the most interesting was the hobble skirt bottle. The hobble skirt was a fashion trend during the 1910s, where the skirt had a very tapered look and was so narrow below the knees that it hobbled the wearer, much like the pinched middle of the Coca-Cola bottle. Others called it the Mae West bottle, after the famous actress's curvaceous figure. The bottle's feminine curves made it stand out in an era when most industrial products were designed with purely functional masculine aesthetics. In 1925, a French magazine called Le Monde described the Coca-Cola container as having a distinctive contour shape, the term that would eventually become official. But to most people, it was simply the Coke bottle. The contour bottle was introduced nationally in April of 1917. The rollout was carefully coordinated across hundreds of bottling plants. Glass companies across the United States began producing the bottles in massive quantities. The impact was immediate and profound. Consumers could now identify Coca-Cola instantly, even in crowded, ice-filled barrels at country stores. The knockoff brands could copy the taste, copy the name, copy the advertising, but they couldn't copy the patented bottle shape. Coca-Cola bottlers began winning their legal battles against imitators. Courts recognized the contour bottle as a distinctive trademark, offering legal protection that mere label designs never could. By 1920, the contour bottle had become so iconic that Coca-Cola began featuring it prominently in advertising. The 1918 calendar featured an elegant young woman holding the newly designed bottle. The message was clear. This wasn't just a container, it was part of the brand identity. As the bottles spread across America and eventually around the world, people began to collect them, save them, use them for other purposes after the soda was gone. The contour bottle had transcended its function. It had become a cultural artifact. The Christmas bottle. Narrator. The patent on the contour bottle was renewed for the first time in 1923. Due to the quirks of the Patent Office publication schedule, the renewed patent was published in the Official Gazette on December 25, 1923, Christmas Day. All contour bottles produced between late 1923 and 1937 carried this Christmas Day patent imprint, December 25, 1923. Collectors today refer to these bottles as Christmas bottles, and they've become highly sought after by enthusiasts and historians. That Christmas patent date became part of Coca-Cola folklore, a small detail that added to the bottle's mystique and charm. In 1928, a milestone was reached that would have shocked Asa Candler. The volume of Coca-Cola sold in bottles exceeded that sold through soda fountains for the first time. The shift reflected broader changes in American life. More families owned refrigerators, more people owned cars. Americans were spending more time at home and on the road, and less time sitting at drugstore soda fountains. The bottle, that distinctive, patented, unmistakable bottle, had made this possible. It transformed Coca-Cola from a fountain beverage into something you could take anywhere, to picnics, to baseball games, to work, to the beach. The contour bottle didn't just contain Coca-Cola, it liberated it. The contour bottle would go on to become one of the most recognized designs in human history. In 1949, a study showed that fewer than 1% of Americans could not identify a bottle of Coke by its shape alone. Industrial designer Raymond Loewy, whose own work included iconic designs for Studebaker and the Coca-Cola fountain, called the contour bottle a masterpiece of scientific functional planning and the perfect liquid wrapper. When Andy Warhol wanted a shape to represent mass culture and American consumerism in his pop art, he drew the Coca-Cola bottle. When Volkswagen wanted to celebrate the shape of the Beetle, they compared the car's silhouette to the bottle. The bottle appeared in films, songs, paintings, and literature. It transcended commerce and became art. It became a symbol not just of a soft drink, but of America itself, for better or worse. And it all started with a machinist in Indiana looking at a picture of a cocoa pod in a public library, imagining a bottle that could be recognized in the dark. In 1919, when Ernest Woodruff's investment group purchased the Coca-Cola Company for $25 million, few could have predicted that Ernest's son would become one of the most important figures in Coca-Cola's history. Robert Winship Woodruff was 33 years old when he was elected president of the Coca-Cola Company in 1923. He would lead the company for more than 6 decades, transforming it from an American beverage company into a global empire.
Woodruff brought discipline, vision, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. He understood that Coca-Cola's success depended on 3 things: consistent quality, ubiquitous distribution, and relentless marketing. Under his leadership, all 3 would reach new heights. January 17, 1920. The 18th Amendment went into effect, ushering in Prohibition, the nationwide ban on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages. For most American businesses, Prohibition was a disaster. Breweries closed, distilleries shuttered, bars and saloons went underground. But for the Coca-Cola Company, Prohibition was the greatest gift imaginable. Suddenly, America's favorite alcoholic beverages were illegal. People needed alternatives, legal, refreshing, socially acceptable alternatives. Coca-Cola was perfectly positioned to fill that void. Robert Woodruff recognized the opportunity immediately. He doubled down on advertising, positioning Coca-Cola as the sophisticated adult beverage for the Prohibition era. The tagline, "The pause that refreshes," became ubiquitous, appearing on billboards in magazines, on painted barn sides across rural America. During the 13 years of Prohibition, from 1920 to 1933, Coca-Cola's sales and profits soared to unprecedented heights. By the time Prohibition ended, Coca-Cola had cemented its place as America's beverage of choice. The company that had once averaged 9 drinks per day in a single Atlanta pharmacy was now selling millions of servings daily across the nation. In 1923, Woodruff approved another innovation that would transform the business, the 6-bottle carton. Before this, customers could only buy Coca-Cola 1 bottle at a time. If you wanted to take Coke home, you need to make multiple trips or carry loose bottles awkwardly. The 6-bottle carton changed everything. Now families could easily carry home half a dozen ice-cold Cokes for dinner, for weekend gatherings, for any occasion. The carton made Coca-Cola a household staple rather than just an occasional treat purchased at the drugstore fountain. The 6-pack revolutionized soft drink consumption. It made home consumption practical and encouraged people to stock up. Sales exploded. Other beverage companies quickly copied the format, but Coca-Cola had been first, and consumers remembered. In 1929, Coca-Cola unveiled what would become one of the most successful advertising slogans in history, the pause that refreshes. The campaign was brilliant in its simplicity. It didn't focus on ingredients or health claims or even taste. Instead, it sold a moment, a brief respite from the hectic pace of modern life. In the bustling, industrializing America of the 1920s, people were working harder and faster than ever before. The Coca-Cola pause offered them permission to stop, rest, and enjoy a simple pleasure. The advertising featured beautiful illustrations of everyday Americans. Workers on lunch breaks, women shopping, families gathered together, all united by that distinctive bottle of Coca-Cola. The artwork had a timeless, almost nostalgic quality, even when it was new, connecting the modern product to simpler, more innocent times. The campaign worked spectacularly. Sales continued their upward trajectory throughout the decade. Woodruff didn't just want to dominate America, he wanted to conquer the world. The first international Coca-Cola bottling plants had opened in Canada and the Philippines in 1906. Cuba and Panama followed in 1907. But these were modest operations, mostly serving American expatriates and tourists. Under Woodruff's leadership, international expansion became systematic and aggressive. Throughout the 1920s, new bottling operations opened across Latin America and Europe. By 1929, Coca-Cola was bottled in 78 countries. Woodruff understood that standardization was key. The formula would be identical everywhere. The bottle would look the same everywhere. The logo would be consistent everywhere. A Coca-Cola in Paris should taste exactly like a Coca-Cola in Atlanta or Havana or Manila. This consistency would become one of Coca-Cola's greatest competitive advantages. In an increasingly interconnected world, Coca-Cola offered something reliable, familiar, and distinctly American no matter where you were. The 1920s were spectacular years for the Coca-Cola Company. America was booming, the economy was expanding, consumer confidence was high, and Coca-Cola rode the wave brilliantly. Annual advertising budgets reached unprecedented levels. The company sponsored radio programs. It plastered advertisements in every major magazine. Coca-Cola signs appeared on streetcars in every American city. The iconic red and white Coca-Cola disc, which could be mounted on the exterior of any store, restaurant, or pharmacy, became one of the most recognizable symbols in America. If you saw that disc, you knew refreshment was just inside. By 1929, Coca-Cola was served at more than 1 million locations in the United States alone. The company's stock price had risen dramatically. Robert Woodruff and the other investors who had purchased the company for $25 million in 1919 had made an extraordinary return. Everything seemed perfect. The future looked limitless. And then on October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression had arrived, and Coca-Cola would face its greatest test yet.
The Great Depression devastated America. By 1933, unemployment had reached 25%. Banks failed. Businesses collapsed. Families lost their homes. Millions went hungry. For most companies, the Depression meant layoffs, cutbacks, and desperation. But Robert Woodruff made a decision that seemed insane to many of his colleagues. He increased advertising spending. While competitors slashed their budgets, Coca-Cola maintained its massive promotional campaigns. Woodruff believed, correctly as it turned out, that the Depression would end eventually. And when it did, he wanted Coca-Cola to be the first brand Americans thought of when they had a nickel to spare. He was also betting on Coca-Cola's affordability. At just 5 cents, the same price it had been since 1886, a bottle of Coke represented one of the few luxuries even poor families could occasionally afford. In a world stripped of excess, that 5-cent bottle offered a small moment of happiness, a brief taste of better times. The strategy worked. While Coca-Cola's sales declined slightly in the early 1930s, the company remained profitable throughout the Depression, a remarkable achievement that very few major corporations could claim. For an astounding 73 years, from 1886 to 1959, a bottle of Coca-Cola cost 5 cents. That price point became sacred, part of Coca-Cola's identity. During the Depression, maintaining the 5-cent price required extraordinary discipline and creativity. When costs rose, Coca-Cola couldn't simply raise prices without risking customer revolt. Instead, the company had to find ways to cut costs without compromising quality. They standardized production processes. They negotiated harder with sugar suppliers. They streamlined distribution. Every penny mattered. The 5-cent Coke became a powerful symbol during the Depression. In a time of economic uncertainty and chaos, that price was constant, reliable, comforting. You knew exactly what a Coca-Cola cost, and you knew you could afford it, even if only occasionally. The nickel Coke would endure for another quarter century after the Depression ended, becoming one of the most iconic price points in American commercial history. In 1931, Coca-Cola commissioned artist Haddon Sundblom to create a series of Christmas advertisements featuring Santa Claus. Now, it's a common misconception that Coca-Cola invented the modern image of Santa Claus. They didn't. Santa had been depicted in red and white clothing since the 1860s, decades before Coca-Cola's involvement. But what Coca-Cola did do was standardize and popularize a particular version of Santa, a warm, jolly, grandfatherly figure in red and white, pausing during his Christmas Eve journey to enjoy a refreshing Coca-Cola. Sundblom's Santa paintings appeared in Coca-Cola advertisements every year from 1931 to 1964. The artwork was so beautiful, so appealing, so perfectly executed, that it became embedded in American consciousness. Generations of children grew up seeing these images in magazines, on billboards, on cardboard cutouts in stores. Did Coca-Cola create Santa Claus? No. Did they create the Santa that most Americans picture when they think of Christmas? Arguably, yes. The Santa Claus campaign was marketing genius. It associated Coca-Cola with America's most beloved holiday, with family, with generosity, with joy. It softened the brand, making it feel less like a corporation and more like a member of the family, and it worked. Christmas became Coca-Cola's biggest sales season, a position it still holds today. December 7, 1941. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor brought America into World War II. The next day, Congress declared war. Young American men enlisted by the millions. For Robert Woodruff, the war posed both a challenge and an opportunity. With sugar rationed and bottling materials scarce, domestic Coca-Cola production faced severe constraints. But Woodruff saw something bigger, a chance to make Coca-Cola part of the American war effort and to expand the brand globally in ways that would have taken decades in peacetime. On December 17, 1941, just 10 days after Pearl Harbor, Woodruff sent a telegram that would define Coca-Cola's wartime strategy. We will see that every man in uniform gets a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents wherever he is and whatever it costs. This was an extraordinary commitment. It meant that Coca-Cola would supply the US military with product at a loss if necessary, absorbing whatever costs were required to get that 5-cent Coke into the hands of American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines anywhere in the world. It was patriotism. It was also brilliant business strategy. To fulfill Woodruff's promise, Coca-Cola employees would need to follow American troops into combat zones around the world. They would need to set up bottling operations on battlefields, in jungles, on remote Pacific islands, wherever American forces were fighting. But there was a problem. Coca-Cola employees were civilians. They couldn't just show up in war zones. The solution was creative. Coca-Cola workers would be commissioned as technical observers, civilian employees given quasi-military status and uniforms. They would be authorized to travel with the military, setting up mobile bottling operations wherever needed. Between 1942 and 1945, the Coca-Cola Company installed 64 bottling plants on every major front of the war in North Africa, Italy, France, the Philippines, the South Pacific, Australia, and countless other locations. These weren't small operations. Some were complete bottling facilities capable of producing thousands of bottles per day, built from scratch in war zones under enemy fire. Over the course of the war, these military bottling plants produced more than 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola for American servicemen, all sold at the sacred 5-cent price, no matter what it actually cost to produce and deliver them in combat conditions. For the soldiers, that bottle of Coca-Cola was more than just a refreshment. It was a taste of home. It was a reminder of what they were fighting for. It was America in a bottle. Letters home from soldiers frequently mentioned receiving a Coca-Cola. One Marine fighting in the Pacific wrote, "Last night I had my first Coke in 17 months. You can't imagine what it meant." While war raged in Europe and the Pacific, Coca-Cola was also expanding rapidly in Latin America as part of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Good Neighbor policy. The U.S. government encouraged American companies to invest in Latin America to strengthen political and economic ties and counter potential Nazi influence in the region. Coca-Cola seized the opportunity. Throughout the war years, new bottling plants opened across Latin America. The company hired local workers, partnered with local businessmen, and adapted its advertising to local cultures while maintaining the core Coca-Cola identity. By 1945, Coca-Cola had established a dominant position throughout Central and South America, a market that would provide extraordinary growth in the decades to come. On the home front, Coca-Cola adapted its advertising to the realities of war. Women became the focus of many campaigns as they took on new roles in factories, offices, and on farms while men fought overseas. Coca-Cola advertisements featured women in uniform, women working in defense plants, women juggling jobs and families. The message was clear. Coca-Cola understood and celebrated the contributions of American women to the war effort. The company also emphasized its own patriotic contributions. Advertisements proudly noted that Coca-Cola was providing refreshment to troops around the world. Every bottle purchased at home was, in a sense, supporting the soldiers abroad. This patriotic positioning would pay enormous dividends in the post-war years. When World War II ended in August 1945, the Coca-Cola Company had been fundamentally transformed. Before the war, Coca-Cola was primarily an American brand with limited international presence. After the war, it was a global phenomenon. Millions of American servicemen had developed deep loyalty to Coca-Cola during their military service. They had shared it with Allied soldiers from Britain, Australia, France, and dozens of other nations. They had introduced it to people in every corner of the world where American forces had fought. And critically, Coca-Cola now had bottling infrastructure on every continent except Antarctica. The 64 military bottling plants could be converted to civilian operations. The distribution networks were in place. The brand recognition existed. Robert Woodruff's wartime gamble, spending whatever was necessary to put Coca-Cola in the hands of every American serviceman, had been vindicated spectacularly. That 5-cent Coke, delivered to soldiers in foxholes and aboard warships, had created brand loyalty that would last a lifetime and had planted the seeds for global domination. As American GIs returned home victorious in 1945, Coca-Cola was positioned to become not just America's beverage, but the world's. The 1950s were glorious years for America and for the Coca-Cola Company. The economy boomed. Returning servicemen married, started families, and moved to the newly built suburbs sprouting around every American city. They bought cars, homes, refrigerators, and Coca-Cola by the case. The baby boom was underway, and Coca-Cola positioned itself as the perfect family beverage. Advertisements showed wholesome American families gathering around the dinner table, teenagers at sock hops, kids at baseball games, always with Coca-Cola present. The messaging was consistent. Coca-Cola was fun, refreshing, and quintessentially American. It represented optimism, prosperity, and the good life. Sales soared to record heights year after year. In 1957, Coca-Cola launched a new advertising slogan that would define the decade: "Sign of good taste." The campaign was sophisticated and aspirational. It positioned Coca-Cola not as a cheap commodity, but as a mark of refinement and social status. The advertisements featured elegant people in upscale settings, well-dressed couples at restaurants, fashionable women at social gatherings, successful businessmen at lunch. The message was subtle but powerful. Discerning people chose Coca-Cola. It was the beverage of winners, of successful Americans, of those who knew quality when they tasted it. This aspirational positioning helped Coca-Cola maintain premium pricing and cultural cachet even as it became ubiquitous. In 1955, Coca-Cola broke with tradition in a significant way. They introduced larger bottle sizes. The classic 6.5-ounce contour bottle had been the standard for decades, but American appetites and expectations were changing. Families wanted more Coke at once. The solution was the king-size bottle, initially 10 ounces, later expanding to 12 ounces and beyond. Purists worried that larger bottles would dilute the brand, but consumers loved them. The king-size bottles flew off shelves, and Coca-Cola's volume sales increased dramatically. The introduction of larger sizes also allowed Coca-Cola to effectively raise prices without violating the sacred 5-cent tradition. A 10-ounce bottle could sell for 10 cents, a 12-ounce for 12 cents. The per-ounce price remained roughly equivalent, but total revenue per transaction increased. Eventually, in 1959, after 73 years, Coca-Cola finally abandoned the 5-cent price point as inflation made it unsustainable. But by then, the brand was so dominant that the price increase barely slowed sales. The 1950s and 1960s saw another revolution in Coca-Cola distribution: the mass deployment of vending machines. Coin-operated Coca-Cola machines appeared everywhere, in gas stations, factories, office buildings, schools, bus stations, bowling alleys, and apartment building lobbies. The machines were painted in Coca-Cola's distinctive red and white colors, making them instantly recognizable. The vending machines solved a key problem. They made Coca-Cola available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without requiring a store clerk or cashier. Want a Coke at midnight? Just find a vending machine, drop in your coins, and pull the bottle from the cold chest. By 1960, hundreds of thousands of Coca-Cola vending machines dotted the American landscape. They became cultural landmarks, gathering spots, part of the visual fabric of American life. Things go better with Coke. Narrator. As the 1960s arrived, Coca-Cola needed to stay relevant to a new generation. The children born during the baby boom were becoming teenagers and young adults, and they had different tastes, different values, different cultural touchstones than their parents. In 1963, Coca-Cola launched one of its most successful campaigns ever, "Things Go Better with Coke." The advertisements featured young, energetic people enjoying life, surfing, dancing, partying, falling in love. The music was upbeat and catchy. The visuals were bright and colorful. The message was simple: whatever you're doing, Coca-Cola makes it better. The campaign perfectly captured the optimistic, youthful spirit of the early 1960s. It positioned Coca-Cola as the beverage of young America, fun, vibrant, and essential to a good time. The slogan ran for 6 years and became embedded in popular culture. People sang the jingle. They repeated the phrase. "Things Go Better with Coke" became more than advertising. It became a cultural catchphrase. But while Coca-Cola was riding high, a serious threat was developing. Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola's primary competitor, had struggled for decades in Coke's shadow. Founded in 1893, just 7 years after Coca-Cola, Pepsi had gone bankrupt twice and was generally considered the inferior product, the cheap alternative for people who couldn't afford the real thing. But in the 1960s, Pepsi began fighting back aggressively with a new strategy. They positioned themselves as the choice of the Pepsi generation, young, modern, forward-thinking Americans who rejected their parents' traditions and brands. The Pepsi Generation campaign was brilliant marketing. It didn't claim Pepsi tasted better. Instead, it made drinking Pepsi an identity statement. If you saw yourself as young, cool, and progressive, you drank Pepsi. Coca-Cola, by implication, was your parents' drink, old-fashioned and out of touch. The strategy worked. Pepsi's market share began growing, particularly among younger consumers. The Cola Wars had begun. Coca-Cola fought back in 1969 with a campaign that would become legendary. "It's the real thing." The campaign was defensive, yet assertive. It reminded consumers that Coca-Cola was the original, the authentic cola. Pepsi might be the newcomer trying to sound hip, but Coca-Cola was real, genuine, the standard by which all others were measured. The advertising featured a diverse array of Americans, young and old, black and white, urban and rural, all united by their love of Coca-Cola. The message was inclusive. Coca-Cola belonged to everyone, not just one generation. In 1971, "It's the Real Thing" culminated in one of the most famous commercials ever produced. The Hilltop ad, featuring young people from around the world standing on a hillside in Italy singing, "I'd like to buy the world a Coke." The commercial aired during a tumultuous time. America was deeply divided over the Vietnam War, civil rights, and generational conflict. The Hilltop ad offered a vision of unity, peace, and shared humanity, with Coca-Cola as the symbol bringing people together. The song became a pop culture phenomenon. It was recorded as a full-length single by the New Seekers and reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Coca-Cola received thousands of letters praising the commercial. People requested copies of the sheet music. The ad had transcended advertising to become a piece of American culture. But despite the success of the Hilltop campaign, Pepsi continued gaining ground. The Cola Wars were intensifying, introducing Tab, Sprite, and Fresca. Narrator: In response to changing consumer preferences, Coca-Cola began diversifying its product lineup in the 1960s and early 1970s. In 1961, they launched Sprite, a lemon-lime soda designed to compete with 7-Up. Sprite positioned itself as the clear choice, emphasizing its clean, crisp taste. It quickly became one of the most popular soft drinks in America. In 1963, Coca-Cola introduced Tab, their first diet cola. As Americans became increasingly concerned about weight and calories, diet sodas represented a huge growth opportunity. Tab used saccharin as a sweetener and was marketed primarily to women concerned about their figures. While the taste was controversial, many found saccharin's aftertaste unpleasant. Tab developed a loyal following. In 1966, Fresca arrived, a grapefruit-flavored, sugar-free beverage targeting health-conscious adults. Fresca's advertising positioned it as a sophisticated alternative to regular sodas with slogans like "It's a Blizzard." These new products helped Coca-Cola maintain overall market dominance, even as Pepsi chipped away at classic Coca-Cola's share. The company was no longer just about Coke. It was becoming a beverage empire with products for every taste and preference. While competing with Pepsi in America, Coca-Cola was also conquering the world. By 1970, Coca-Cola was sold in more than 135 countries. The company had bottling operations on every inhabited continent. The distinctive red and white logo could be seen in tiny villages in Africa, crowded cities in Asia, remote islands in the Pacific. Coca-Cola adapted its advertising to local cultures while maintaining consistent branding. In India, advertisements featured Bollywood stars. In Japan, they emphasized the product's American origins. In Europe, they focused on Coke's role in social gatherings. But everywhere, the product was the same. A Coca-Cola in Tokyo tasted identical to a Coca-Cola in New York or Lagos or Sydney. This consistency was a massive competitive advantage. It meant Coca-Cola could leverage its global scale while still feeling local. The international business was becoming increasingly important to Coca-Cola's bottom line. By the mid-1970s, more than half of the company's profits came from outside the United States. Coca-Cola had truly become a global brand. In 1955, Robert Woodruff had stepped down as president of the Coca-Cola Company, though he remained chairman of the board and continued to wield enormous influence. For more than 6 decades, from 1923 until his death in 1985, Woodruff shaped Coca-Cola's destiny. He had navigated the Great Depression, turned World War II into a global expansion opportunity, built the modern advertising campaigns, and established Coca-Cola as one of the most valuable brands on earth. His legacy was extraordinary. The company he had taken over for $25 million in 1919 was now worth billions. The beverage that had been sold primarily at American soda fountains was now consumed in nearly every country on the planet. But as the 1970s arrived, Coca-Cola faced its most serious competitive threat in decades. Pepsi was no longer a minor irritant. It was a genuine rival, gaining market share every quarter, particularly among the crucial youth demographic. The stage was set for the most dramatic chapter in Coca-Cola's history, the New Coke disaster of 1985. By the early 1980s, the Cola Wars had reached fever pitch. Pepsi launched the Pepsi Challenge, blind taste tests conducted in shopping malls across America. The results, heavily promoted in television commercials, showed that more people preferred Pepsi's sweeter taste over Coca-Cola. The Pepsi Challenge was devastating to Coca-Cola's mystique. For decades, Coke had been the unquestioned leader, the standard of excellence. Now, in carefully orchestrated public demonstrations, regular Americans were choosing Pepsi. Coca-Cola's market share, which had been as high as 60% in the 1940s, had fallen to just under 22% by 1984. Pepsi, meanwhile, had climbed to nearly 19%. In supermarkets where consumers could directly compare prices and make their own choices, Pepsi was actually outselling Coca-Cola. For Coca-Cola executives, the trend was terrifying. If it continued, Pepsi would overtake Coke as America's favorite cola within a few years. Something had to be done. Roberto Goizueta, who had become CEO of the Coca-Cola Company in 1981, faced an agonizing decision. Coca-Cola commissioned its own taste tests, secret research involving nearly 200,000 consumers. The results confirmed what Pepsi had been saying. In blind taste tests, most people preferred a sweeter cola flavor. Coca-Cola's research team developed a new formula, one that was sweeter, smoother, and more like Pepsi. In blind tests, the new formula beat both Pepsi and classic Coke by significant margins. The data seemed overwhelming. If Coca-Cola changed its formula to match consumer preferences revealed in blind taste tests, it could recapture lost market share and end the Pepsi threat. But changing the formula meant abandoning a 99-year-old recipe, a formula that had become an American icon. It meant admitting that Coca-Cola, the real thing, hadn't been good enough all along. The decision was hotly debated within the company. Some executives urged caution. Changing Coke's formula was extraordinarily risky. But Goizueta was convinced by the research. The numbers didn't lie. A sweeter Coke would win. On April 23, 1985, at a press conference in New York City, Goizueta announced that the Coca-Cola Company was changing the formula of Coca-Cola for the first time in 99 years. The new product would simply be called Coke, though the public quickly dubbed it New Coke. Goizueta confidently declared it the surest move ever made. Goizueta was catastrophically wrong. Within days of New Coke's launch, a tidal wave of consumer outrage swept across America. Coca-Cola's headquarters in Atlanta was inundated with angry phone calls, 8,000 per day at the peak, overwhelming the company's switchboards. Letters poured in by the tens of thousands. People called the company traitors. They compared the formula change to trampling on the American flag. One letter writer declared, "There are only two things in my life, God and Coca-Cola. Now you have taken one of those things away from me." Protest groups formed almost overnight. The Old Cola Drinkers of America, led by a Seattle man named Gay Mullins, claimed to recruit 100,000 members in a drive to bring back original Coke. They held rallies, distributed protest buttons, and generated massive media coverage. In some cities, protesters poured new Coke into the streets in symbolic demonstrations. In Seattle, they dumped it into the sewer system. At a Coca-Cola event in downtown Atlanta, protesters carried signs reading, "We want the real thing," and "Our children will never know refreshment." People began hoarding original Coke. Stories emerged of individuals stockpiling hundreds of bottles in their basements, rationing them carefully to make them last as long as possible. Some bottles of original Coke were reportedly selling for as much as $30 on the black market. The media covered the controversy obsessively. Late-night talk show hosts made it a punchline. Newspaper columnists wrote scathing critiques. Consumer advocates blasted the company for ignoring customer loyalty in pursuit of market share. But perhaps most damning, the taste tests that had predicted New Coke's success turned out to be misleading. Yes, people preferred a sweeter cola in a single sip during a blind taste test, but that didn't mean they wanted to drink an entire bottle of the sweeter formula. And more importantly, the taste tests hadn't measured something crucial: the deep emotional attachment people felt to Coca-Cola. Customers didn't want Coca-Cola to change. They wanted it to stay exactly as it had always been: familiar, reliable, constant in an uncertain world. The consumer rejection of New Coke wasn't just emotional, it was economic. Sales plummeted 20% in the first 2 months after New Coke's release. Bottlers panicked. Retailers complained. The company's stock price wavered. Meanwhile, Pepsi seized the opportunity with glee. They launched commercials mocking Coca-Cola's decision, featuring a young girl asking, "Somebody out there tell me why Coke did it? Why did Coke change?" Pepsi's CEO Roger Enrico publicly gloated, saying the two companies had been going at it eyeball to eyeball, and in my view, the other guy just blinked. Inside Coca-Cola headquarters, panic was setting in. This wasn't a minor public relations problem. This was an existential crisis. On July 10, 1985, just 79 days after New Coke's launch, ABC News anchor Peter Jennings interrupted the afternoon soap opera General Hospital with breaking news. There is likely no other country in the world where an evening broadcast such as this would begin with the news that a popular soft drink was going to reintroduce its original formula, Jennings said. But this is America, and Coca-Cola is part of Americana. The next day, July 11th, 1985, Coca-Cola held a press conference in Atlanta. The atmosphere was subdued, almost funereal, vastly different from the triumphant announcement just 3 months earlier. Donald Keogh, the company's president, made the announcement. The simple fact is that all of the time and money and skill poured into consumer research on a new Coca-Cola could not measure or reveal the depth and abiding emotional attachment to original Coca-Cola felt by so many people. The original formula was returning to stores under the name Coca-Cola Classic. It would be sold alongside New Coke, giving consumers a choice. The announcement was headline news across America. Network newscasts led with the story. Major newspapers put it on the front page. Consumer advocates declared victory. Within 48 hours of the announcement, bottlers had ordered 24 million cases of Coca-Cola Classic. Store shelves emptied as customers stockpiled the returned product. Those who had been hoarding hundreds of bottles in their basements could finally drink freely again. In Bellevue, Washington, Gay Mullins, president of the Old Cola Drinkers of America, received the first delivery of Coca-Cola Classic, a symbolic acknowledgement of his group's role in the campaign to bring back the original. In the months and years following the return of Coca-Cola Classic, something unexpected happened. Sales didn't just recover, they soared beyond pre-New Coke levels. The crisis had reminded Americans how much they loved Coca-Cola. The threat of losing it had intensified their loyalty. People who had taken Coke for granted suddenly appreciated it. Brand affection surged. Within 6 months, Coca-Cola Classic was outselling both New Coke and Pepsi. By 1990, Coke had recaptured much of its lost market share. The brand that seemed mortally wounded in April 1985 had emerged stronger than ever. New Coke, meanwhile, faded away. It was rebranded as Coke 2 in 1992 and remained on shelves for a few more years, but it never captured more than a tiny fraction of the market. In 2002, it was quietly discontinued. Some conspiracy theorists claimed the entire New Coke episode had been a calculated marketing stunt, that Coca-Cola had deliberately created a crisis to generate publicity and boost sales. Company executives always denied this, insisting it had been a genuine mistake. "We're not that dumb, and we're not that smart," one executive later quipped. Roberto Goizueta, who remained CEO until his death in 1997, eventually reframed the disaster as a prime example of taking intelligent risks. He urged employees to continue taking risks, arguing it was critical to the company's success. But the clear lesson from New Coke was different. Some things are bigger than market research. Some brands become so embedded in the culture, so intimately connected to people's identities and memories, that changing them is almost impossible, no matter what the data says. The New Coke disaster has become a legendary business case study taught in universities around the world as an example of how not to manage a brand. It taught marketers that blind taste tests don't capture emotional attachment. It demonstrated that brands can become cultural institutions with meanings far beyond their functional attributes. It showed that sometimes the wise move is not to innovate, but to preserve. And it proved, definitively, that customers didn't want Coca-Cola to be better. They wanted it to be Coca-Cola. Since 1985, the Coca-Cola Company has never again attempted to change the formula of its flagship product. Coca-Cola Classic, later just Coca-Cola again once New Coke was discontinued, remains exactly as it was in 1886, with one exception: the removal of cocaine in 1903. The formula that John Pemberton mixed in a brass kettle, that Asa Candler marketed across America, that Robert Woodruff took global, that survived the Depression and World War II, that formula is sacred now, protected not just by trademark law, but by the passionate devotion of billions of consumers worldwide. The 1990s opened with unprecedented opportunities for global expansion. The Berlin Wall had fallen in 1989. The Soviet Union was collapsing. Eastern Europe was opening to Western commerce. China was accelerating its market reforms. India was liberalizing its economy. For the Coca-Cola Company, this meant access to billions of potential new consumers, people who had never tasted Coca-Cola or had only limited exposure to it. Under CEO Roberto Goizueta's continued leadership, Coca-Cola aggressively pursued these emerging markets. Bottling plants opened across Eastern Europe. Distribution networks were built in former Soviet republics. Joint ventures were established in China. Investments poured into India, Brazil, and other developing nations. By 2000, Coca-Cola products were available in more than 200 countries, essentially everywhere except North Korea and Cuba. The sun never set on the Coca-Cola empire. In 1993, Coca-Cola launched a new global advertising campaign, Always Coca-Cola. The campaign was notable for its diversity and creativity. Rather than a single message, Always Coca-Cola encompassed dozens of different advertisements, each targeting specific demographics and regions. One of the most memorable elements was the introduction of the Coca-Cola polar bears, animated characters that appeared in commercials starting in 1993. The polar bears were an instant hit, particularly with children and families. They were cute, friendly, and completely family-friendly, a perfect fit for a brand that wanted to appeal to all ages. The polar bears became so beloved that they've remained part of Coca-Cola's advertising ever since, appearing in countless commercials, on packaging, and in promotional materials. The Always Coca-Cola campaign ran until 2000 and reinforced a simple message. Coca-Cola isn't just for certain occasions or certain people. It's always the right choice, everywhere, for everyone. The 1990s and 2000s saw the Coca-Cola company dramatically diversify beyond carbonated soft drinks. In 1999, Coca-Cola launched Dasani, a bottled water brand, responding to growing consumer interest in healthier beverages. While some criticized the fact that Dasani was essentially purified tap water, the brand quickly became one of America's best-selling bottled waters. The company expanded its juice offerings, with Minute Maid and Simply Orange becoming major players in the juice market. In sports drinks, Powerade emerged as a significant competitor to Gatorade. Coca-Cola also acquired local brands in international markets, recognizing that not every consumer wanted American-style colas. In India, they purchased Thumbs Up, a locally beloved cola brand. In Japan, they marketed dozens of unique products tailored to Japanese tastes, including canned coffee and tea drinks. By 2010, the Coca-Cola Company offered more than 500 brands across 200 countries. While Coca-Cola remained the flagship, the company had become a comprehensive beverage conglomerate. But as Coca-Cola's global reach expanded, a serious challenge was emerging: growing concern about the health impacts of sugary soft drinks. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, obesity rates in the United States and other developed nations skyrocketed. Public health researchers increasingly pointed to sugary sodas as a major contributor to obesity, diabetes, and other health problems. Coca-Cola found itself in the crosshairs of health advocates, government regulators, and concerned parents. Critics noted that a single can of Coca-Cola contained 39 grams of sugar, more than the recommended daily intake for children. Schools began banning soft drink sales. Cities proposed taxes on sugary beverages. Public health campaigns urged people to drink water instead of soda. For a company built on selling sugary drinks, this was an existential threat. Coca-Cola had actually been ahead of the diet trend in some ways. Diet Coke, launched in 1982 to replace Tab as the company's primary diet offering, had become extraordinarily successful. By the 2000s, it was the third best-selling soft drink in America, behind only Coca-Cola and Pepsi. But Diet Coke had a problem: men wouldn't drink it. The branding, advertising, and even the word diet all skewed feminine. Male consumers avoided it. In 2005, Coca-Cola launched Coke Zero, essentially the same formula as Diet Coke but with marketing targeted at men. The branding emphasized the product's similarity to regular Coke, zero sugar, same great Coke taste, rather than its diet attributes. Coke Zero was a hit, particularly among younger male consumers who wanted to reduce sugar intake without drinking something called diet. These zero sugar and low-calorie options allowed Coca-Cola to maintain relevance with health-conscious consumers while still offering traditional Coke to those who wanted it. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Coca-Cola maintained its position as one of the world's most prolific sports sponsors. The company had been an Olympic sponsor since 1928, making it the longest continuous corporate partner of the Olympic Games. This association with athletic excellence helped counter criticisms about Coca-Cola products being unhealthy. Coca-Cola also sponsored FIFA World Cup events, NASCAR races, the NFL, and countless other sporting events worldwide. The message was clear. Coca-Cola wasn't just for couch potatoes. It was the beverage of athletes and active people too. These sponsorships cost hundreds of millions of dollars but provided invaluable global exposure and brand association with positive, healthy activities. By the early 2000s, two markets loomed as the ultimate prizes for Coca-Cola: India and China, home to nearly 40% of the world's population. In China, where Coca-Cola had re-entered in 1979 after being banned for 3 decades under communist rule, the company invested billions in bottling plants, distribution networks, and marketing. By 2010, China had become Coca-Cola's third largest market by volume, behind only the United States and Mexico. The company adapted carefully to Chinese culture. Advertisements featured Chinese celebrities. Products were developed specifically for Chinese tastes, including green tea and soy-based beverages. But classic Coca-Cola remained the flagship, positioned as a symbol of modernity and global sophistication. India proved more challenging. Coca-Cola had left India in 1977 rather than comply with regulations requiring them to share their secret formula and dilute their ownership of local operations. When they returned in 1993, they faced entrenched local competitors and periodic controversies over water usage and pesticide residues. But India's enormous population and growing middle class made it strategically crucial. Coca-Cola persevered, investing heavily and slowly building market share. By 2010, emerging markets like India, China, Brazil, and others accounted for a large and growing portion of Coca-Cola's sales and profits. The future of the company increasingly lay not in saturated American and European markets, but in the developing world. As the 21st century progressed, Coca-Cola faced another major challenge: environmental concerns. The company produced billions of plastic bottles and aluminum cans annually. Critics argued that Coca-Cola was a major contributor to plastic pollution in oceans and landfills worldwide. Water usage was another issue. Coca-Cola plants consumed enormous amounts of water, not just the water in the beverages themselves, but also water for cleaning equipment and facilities. In water-scarce regions, this sparked protests and criticism. Coca-Cola responded with sustainability initiatives. The company committed to recycling or reusing 100% of its packaging by 2030. It invested in water replenishment projects, aiming to return as much water to communities as it used in production. Whether these efforts were genuine environmental leadership or mere public relations remained debated, but clearly Coca-Cola recognized that its long-term future depended on addressing environmental concerns seriously. As the first decade of the 21st century closed, the Coca-Cola Company stood as one of the most successful corporations in human history. The brand was valued at more than $70 billion. Coca-Cola products were consumed nearly 2 billion times per day across the globe. The distinctive script logo was recognized by 94% of the world's population, arguably the most recognized commercial symbol on Earth. But challenges lay ahead. Health concerns were intensifying. Environmental criticism was growing. Consumers, particularly in developed nations, were drinking less soda. The formula that had driven growth for over a century was being questioned. The question facing Coca-Cola as it entered its second century of operation was simple: How does a company built on selling sugar water remain relevant in an increasingly health-conscious, environmentally aware world? The 2010s brought a stark reality. Americans were drinking less soda. After decades of steady growth, per capita consumption of carbonated soft drinks in the United States peaked in the late 1990s and has declined every year since. By 2020, Americans were drinking about 25% less soda than they had at the peak. The reasons were clear: growing health consciousness, concerns about obesity and diabetes, and a cultural shift toward beverages perceived as healthier: water, juice, tea, coffee, and energy drinks. For Coca-Cola, this was a crisis. The American market had always been the company's largest and most profitable. If that market was shrinking permanently, drastic changes would be needed. Open happiness and emotional branding, images of open happiness campaign, global unity themes. Narrator: in 2009, Coca-Cola launched its Open Happiness campaign, attempting to refocus consumers on the emotional benefits of drinking Coke rather than its physical attributes. The advertisements emphasized themes of joy, sharing, connection, and happiness. They downplayed the product itself, the sugar, the calories, the carbonation, and emphasized the feelings associated with drinking Coca-Cola. Open Happiness ran globally until 2016, representing one of Coca-Cola's longest-running campaigns. It was followed by similar emotionally focused campaigns like Taste the Feeling and Real Magic. The strategy was clear. If Coca-Cola couldn't compete on health claims, it would compete on emotional resonance. A bottle of Coke wasn't nutrition. It was a moment of joy, a connection with friends, a small pleasure in a difficult world. The Share a Coke phenomenon. Images of personalized Coke bottles with names. Narrator: in 2011, Coca-Cola Australia launched an innovative campaign that would become a global phenomenon. Share a Coke. The concept was simple: replace the Coca-Cola logo on bottles with popular first names. Instead of Coca-Cola, the label read, "Share a Coke with Sarah" or "Share a Coke with Michael." The campaign was brilliantly effective. People hunted through stores looking for bottles with their own names or the names of friends and family members. They photographed the bottles and shared the images on social media. They bought bottles specifically to give to people whose names appeared on them. Share a Coke leveraged personalization and social media in ways traditional advertising never could. It made every bottle a potential conversation starter, a shareable experience, a connection between people. The campaign rolled out globally throughout the 2010s. With names adapted to each country's popular naming conventions. In some regions, Coca-Cola even allowed customers to order custom bottles with any name they wanted. Share a Coke demonstrated that even in the digital age, even with health concerns mounting, clever marketing could still drive excitement and sales for a 130-year-old product. Acquisitions and portfolio expansion. Images of Costa Coffee, Topo Chico, various acquired brands. Narrator: recognizing that carbonated soft drinks represented a declining category, Coca-Cola aggressively expanded into other beverage categories through acquisitions and product development. In 2018, the company made its largest acquisition in history, Costa Coffee, Britain's largest coffee chain, for $5 billion. The acquisition gave Coca-Cola a foothold in the rapidly growing global coffee market. The company acquired Topo Chico, a Mexican sparkling mineral water brand with a cult following, particularly among younger consumers. They invested in Honest Tea, an organic tea brand. They partnered with Dunkin' on bottled iced coffee drinks. By 2020, less than 50% of Coca-Cola's revenue came from carbonated soft drinks, a dramatic shift from just 20 years earlier. The company had transformed from a soda manufacturer into a total beverage company, offering products in nearly every non-alcoholic beverage category. In 2021, Coca-Cola even entered the alcoholic beverage market in some countries, launching Topo Chico Hard Seltzer and partnering with other companies on alcoholic versions of its brands. The pandemic. COVID-19. Images of pandemic-era operations, empty stadiums, closed restaurants. Narrator. In early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented disruption to the Coca-Cola Company. Roughly half of Coca-Cola's global sales came from restaurants, stadiums, movie theaters, and other away-from-home channels. When lockdowns closed these venues worldwide, those sales vanished almost overnight. In the second quarter of 2020, Coca-Cola's revenue dropped 28% compared to the previous year, the worst quarterly performance in decades. The company laid off thousands of workers and discontinued dozens of underperforming brands to cut costs. But Coca-Cola adapted quickly. They shifted production and distribution to focus on retail channels, supermarkets and convenience stores, where consumers could still buy beverages. They accelerated e-commerce initiatives, allowing consumers to order Coca-Cola products online for home delivery. As vaccines rolled out and economies reopened in 2021 and 2022, Coca-Cola's sales rebounded strongly. The company emerged from the pandemic leaner and more focused, having used the crisis to streamline operations and eliminate less profitable products. The Sustainability Challenge. Images of recycling initiatives, World Without Waste campaign. Narrator. In 2018, Coca-Cola launched World Without Waste, an ambitious sustainability initiative with a bold goal: to collect and recycle the equivalent of every bottle or can the company sells by 2030. The challenge was enormous. Coca-Cola produces approximately 3 million tons of plastic packaging annually, roughly 200,000 bottles per minute. Much of this ends up in landfills or worse, in oceans and waterways, where it harms marine life and pollutes ecosystems. Critics argued the initiative didn't go far enough, that Coca-Cola should eliminate single-use plastics entirely rather than just promising to recycle them. Environmental groups pointed out that even with perfect recycling, the energy and resources required to produce billions of bottles annually remained problematic. Coca-Cola countered that consumers still wanted the convenience of bottled beverages, and that eliminating plastic bottles would simply shift consumption to aluminum cans or glass bottles, which have their own environmental costs. The company invested in recycling infrastructure, particularly in developing nations where such systems barely existed. They redesigned bottles to use less plastic. They increased the percentage of recycled content in new bottles. They partnered with environmental organizations and governments. Whether these efforts represented genuine environmental leadership or sophisticated greenwashing remained hotly debated. But clearly, Coca-Cola recognized that its social license to operate increasingly depended on addressing environmental concerns credibly. The sugar tax battles, images of protests, tax legislation, government hearings. Narrator. Throughout the 2010s and into the 2020s, governments worldwide began implementing taxes on sugary beverages, often called soda taxes or sugar taxes. The logic was simple. If cigarette taxes reduced smoking, maybe taxes on sugary drinks would reduce consumption and combat obesity and diabetes. Mexico implemented a nationwide soda tax in 2014. Several U.S. cities, including Berkeley, Philadelphia, and Seattle, followed with their own taxes. The United Kingdom introduced a sugar levy in 2018. Dozens of other countries considered or implemented similar measures. Coca-Cola fought these taxes aggressively, funding lobbying campaigns and public relations efforts, arguing that such taxes were regressive, hurting poor consumers most, and ineffective at improving public health. But the momentum was against them. Study after study showed that soda taxes did reduce consumption, particularly among low-income populations most at risk for diet-related diseases. More governments implemented such taxes every year. In response, Coca-Cola accelerated its shift toward lower sugar and zero sugar products. In many markets, the company began offering smaller package sizes, mini cans and bottles with fewer calories per serving. Some products were reformulated to reduce sugar content. The sugar tax battles represented a fundamental challenge to Coca-Cola's business model. If governments could make sugary drinks significantly more expensive, consumption would inevitably decline. Social justice and corporate responsibility. Images of diversity campaigns, social movements, corporate statements. Narrator. The 2010s and 2020s also brought increased scrutiny of Coca-Cola's social and political positions. In 2021, when Georgia passed controversial voting restrictions, Coca-Cola, headquartered in Atlanta, faced pressure to speak out. CEO James Quincy eventually called the legislation unacceptable, though critics argued the company's response came too late and wasn't forceful enough. Coca-Cola also faced scrutiny over racial diversity in its leadership and advertising. The company responded with commitments to increase diversity in executive ranks and to spend more advertising dollars with minority-owned media companies. Labor practices at Coca-Cola bottling plants, both in the United States and internationally, periodically sparked controversy and protests. Water usage in water-scarce regions continued to generate criticism and legal challenges. These issues reflected a broader shift in corporate America. Consumers, employees, and investors increasingly expected companies to take stands on social and political issues, not just focus narrowly on profits. For a global brand like Coca-Cola, navigating these expectations while maintaining broad appeal across diverse markets and political perspectives was extraordinarily challenging. The metaverse and digital innovation, images of NFTs, virtual Coca-Cola experiences, digital marketing. Narrator. As the 2020s progressed, Coca-Cola began experimenting with digital and virtual experiences. In 2021, the company auctioned NFTs, non-fungible tokens, of virtual Coca-Cola memorabilia, raising more than $500,000 for charity. It was a bold experiment in connecting a physical product brand with digital culture. Coca-Cola created virtual experiences in gaming platforms like Fortnite and Roblox, where young consumers spent enormous amounts of time. Virtual Coca-Cola billboards appeared in these digital worlds. Players could earn virtual Coca-Cola items as rewards. The company also leveraged artificial intelligence and data analytics to personalize marketing, optimize distribution, and predict consumer preferences with unprecedented precision. These digital initiatives reflected Coca-Cola's recognition that younger consumers lived increasingly in digital spaces and that the brand needed to meet them there, even while continuing to sell physical bottles and cans in the real world. James Quincy's leadership. Images of CEO James Quincy, corporate strategy sessions. Narrator. James Quincy, who became CEO in 2017, has led Coca-Cola through some of its most turbulent years. The pandemic, accelerating health concerns, environmental scrutiny, and rapidly changing consumer preferences. Quincy's strategy has focused on portfolio transformation, aggressively expanding beyond carbonated soft drinks into coffee, tea, sports drinks, plant-based beverages, and even alcoholic drinks in some markets. Under his leadership, the company has discontinued hundreds of underperforming brands to focus resources on winners. He's also championed networked organization, a restructuring that reduced bureaucracy and empowered regional leaders to make decisions faster and respond to local market conditions more effectively. The jury is still out on whether these strategies will successfully navigate Coca-Cola through the challenges of the 21st century, but clearly, Quincy understands that the business model that worked for the previous 130 years cannot simply be extended into the future unchanged. Coca-Cola in popular culture. Narrator. Despite all the challenges, Coca-Cola remains deeply embedded in global popular culture. The brand appears in countless films, from classic Hollywood movies to modern blockbusters. Musicians reference it in songs. Artists incorporate Coca-Cola imagery into their work. The distinctive bottle and logo appear in museums as examples of iconic design. Coca-Cola has been to space. Astronauts tested a special can designed to work in zero gravity. The brand is part of Christmas tradition in many countries thanks to decades of Santa Claus advertising. In some languages, Coca-Cola has become a generic term for any cola-flavored soft drink. This cultural ubiquity is Coca-Cola's greatest asset. Even people who rarely or never drink Coca-Cola recognize the brand and have opinions about it. It's more than a product. It's a cultural touchstone, a symbol, an icon that means different things to different people but is universally recognizable. That cultural capital, built over more than a century, cannot be easily replicated by competitors and gives Coca-Cola resilience even as consumption patterns shift. The future, questions and uncertainties. Narrator. As Coca-Cola moves through the 2020s, fundamental questions remain. Can a company built on selling sugar water thrive in an increasingly health-conscious world? Or will declining soda consumption eventually undermine the entire business? Can Coca-Cola successfully transform itself into a total beverage company? Or will it always be defined primarily by its flagship cola, with all the health concerns that entails? Can the company meet its sustainability commitments, or will environmental challenges eventually limit its ability to produce billions of single-use bottles and cans annually? How will Coca-Cola navigate the political and social expectations of younger consumers who demand that corporations take stands on controversial issues? And perhaps most fundamentally, can a brand invented in 1886, built for a completely different era, remain relevant to consumers born in the 21st century who have never known a world without the internet, smartphones, and instant global connectivity? These questions don't have easy answers. But if history is any guide, Coca-Cola will adapt, evolve, and survive. The company has navigated the Great Depression, World War II, the Cola Wars, the New Coke disaster, and countless other challenges. Its longevity and global reach suggest a resilience that shouldn't be underestimated. Part 10. Cultural Impact and Legacy. Runtime 12 to 15 minutes. The most recognized brand on Earth. Narrator. The Coca-Cola logo is recognized by 94% of the world's population. Think about that for a moment. In every corner of the globe, from the busiest cities to the most remote villages, nearly everyone has seen those distinctive flowing letters, Coca-Cola. Only a handful of symbols, perhaps the Christian cross, the Islamic crescent, the Olympic rings, match Coca-Cola's global recognition. For a commercial product created just over 130 years ago, this is an extraordinary achievement. That recognition translates to extraordinary brand value. In 2023, the Coca-Cola brand was valued at approximately $97 billion, making it one of the most valuable brands on Earth year after year. American soft power narrator. For much of the 20th and 21st centuries, Coca-Cola has served as a symbol of America itself, for better or worse. To some, Coca-Cola represents American innovation, entrepreneurship, and the power of free markets. It's a success story of how a local product from Atlanta became a global phenomenon through quality, consistency, and brilliant marketing. To others, Coca-Cola represents American cultural imperialism, the homogenization of global culture, the replacement of local beverages and traditions with standardized American products. Anti-globalization protesters have targeted Coca-Cola as a symbol of corporate power overriding local communities. When the Berlin Wall fell, when the Soviet Union collapsed, when countries transitioned from communism to capitalism, Coca-Cola was often among the first Western brands to arrive, a visible symbol of the changes underway. During the Iraq War, images of American soldiers sharing Coca-Cola with Iraqi children became symbolic of American presence in the Middle East. When terrorists wanted to attack American interests, Coca-Cola facilities sometimes became targets. Whether seen as benign refreshment or as a symbol of American dominance, Coca-Cola's cultural significance extends far beyond its function as a beverage. It is, in many ways, America's most visible export, more widely distributed than Hollywood films, more universally available than American technology products. The secret formula mystique. Narrator. Part of Coca-Cola's mystique is its secret formula, supposedly known to only a few people at any given time, stored in a vault in Atlanta, protected like a state secret. The truth is more complicated and less romantic. The basic ingredients of Coca-Cola, carbonated water, sugar, caramel color, phosphoric acid, caffeine, and natural flavors, are listed on every bottle. Independent laboratories have analyzed Coca-Cola countless times. Several people have claimed to know the exact formula, and some recipes purporting to be the genuine article have been published. Yet the mystique persists. The Coca-Cola Company carefully cultivates the image of an irreplaceable, mysterious formula that cannot be replicated. They maintain a vault at the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta, where the secret formula is supposedly stored. A tourist attraction that reinforces the mythology. Does the secret formula matter? Probably not in a literal sense. If the exact formula were published tomorrow, it's unlikely any competitor could use it to seriously threaten Coca-Cola. The brand, the distribution, the cultural meaning. These are what make Coca-Cola valuable, not the specific combination of ingredients. But the idea of the secret formula matters enormously. It contributes to the sense that Coca-Cola is unique, irreplaceable, special. It's marketing genius. Turn your product formulation into a cultural legend. Coca-Cola in art and design. Narrator. The Coca-Cola bottle and logo have inspired artists for generations. Andy Warhol famously painted Coca-Cola bottles as symbols of American consumer culture, declaring, "What's great about this country is that America started the tradition where the richest consumers buy essentially the same things as the poorest." You can be watching TV and see Coca-Cola, and you know that the president drinks Coke, Liz Taylor drinks Coke, and just think, you can drink Coke too. For Warhol, Coca-Cola represented democracy through commerce, a product that made no distinctions between rich and poor, famous and unknown. Everyone drank the same Coke. Other artists have used Coca-Cola imagery to critique consumerism, American cultural imperialism, or corporate power. The bottle and logo appear in paintings, sculptures, photographs, and installations in museums worldwide. Industrial designers have celebrated the contour bottle as one of the greatest design achievements of the 20th century. A perfect marriage of form and function, instantly recognizable, yet elegantly simple. The Spencerian script logo, created by Frank Robinson in 1886, has barely changed in more than 130 years, a testament to the timelessness of its design. The collector's culture narrator. Coca-Cola memorabilia collecting has become a substantial subculture worldwide. Vintage Coca-Cola signs, bottles, vending machines, serving trays, clocks, coolers, and countless other items are bought and sold for thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Serious collectors spend lifetimes and fortunes assembling comprehensive collections. The company has encouraged this collector culture, maintaining extensive archives of its own advertising and promotional materials. The World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta displays thousands of artifacts from the company's history, attracting millions of visitors annually. This collector enthusiasm serves Coca-Cola well. It keeps older designs and campaigns alive in public memory. It creates a sense of heritage and permanence. It transforms what could be seen as mere marketing materials into valuable cultural artifacts worth preserving and celebrating. The Santa Claus Connection. Narrator. We mentioned earlier that Coca-Cola didn't invent the modern image of Santa Claus, but they certainly popularized and standardized it. Haddon Sundblom's Santa Claus paintings, created for Coca-Cola from 1931 to 1964, became the definitive image of Santa for multiple generations. That warm, jolly, grandfatherly figure in red and white is now the Santa most people imagine. The connection between Coca-Cola and Christmas has become so strong that in many countries the arrival of Coca-Cola's Christmas advertising marks the unofficial beginning of the holiday season. The company's Christmas trucks, illuminated and traveling through cities, attract crowds and news coverage. This association with Christmas, with family, generosity, joy, and tradition, is enormously valuable. It softens Coca-Cola's commercial nature, connecting the brand to deeper cultural and emotional meanings. The language of cola. Narrator. The word Coca-Cola has entered languages worldwide, often transcribed into non-Latin scripts. Arabic, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Russian, and dozens of others. In some places, Coca-Cola or Coke has become a generic term for any cola-flavored soft drink, the ultimate brand success, though one the company fights legally to prevent, as generic status can threaten trademark protection. Phrases associated with Coca-Cola have entered common language. The pause that refreshes. It's the real thing. Have a Coke and a smile. These aren't just advertising slogans, but cultural references that persist long after the campaign's ended. The bottling system. Local capitalism. Narrator. One of Coca-Cola's most important but least discussed legacies is the independent bottling system. Unlike many corporations that own and operate all their facilities, Coca-Cola relies primarily on independent bottlers who purchase concentrate from the company and produce, distribute, and sell the final product within their territories. This system, born from Asa Candler's short-sighted dollar contract in 1899, has created thousands of family businesses worldwide. Multi-generational bottling companies operate in communities across the globe, employing local workers, supporting local causes, and building wealth within their regions. The bottling system has given Coca-Cola deep roots in local communities. Bottlers sponsor local sports teams, fund scholarships, support charities, and employ their neighbors. This local presence has been crucial to Coca-Cola's success and acceptance worldwide. The critics and controversies. Narrator. Any honest assessment of Coca-Cola's legacy must acknowledge the controversies and criticisms. The company has been accused of contributing to obesity and diabetes through aggressive marketing of sugary drinks. Critics argue that Coca-Cola specifically targets children with advertising, creating lifetime customers before they're old enough to fully understand health implications. Environmental groups condemn the billions of plastic bottles and aluminum cans Coca-Cola produces annually, arguing that no amount of recycling can offset the fundamental waste of single-use packaging. In some countries, Coca-Cola has been accused of exploiting water resources, taking water from communities that face shortages. Labor disputes at bottling plants have sometimes turned violent. In Colombia, union leaders at Coca-Cola bottling facilities have been murdered, though the company's direct responsibility remains disputed. The company's enormous political influence through lobbying, campaign contributions, and funding of scientific research has been criticized as allowing it to avoid meaningful regulation. These controversies remind us that Coca-Cola is not just a nostalgic brand or a cultural icon. It's a massive corporation with real impacts on public health, the environment, and communities worldwide. Those impacts are not uniformly positive. The enduring appeal. Narrator. Yet, despite all the criticism, despite health concerns and environmental challenges, despite changing consumer preferences and intense competition, Coca-Cola endures. People still reach for that distinctive bottle or can, still experience that familiar taste, still associate it with celebration, refreshment, and simple pleasure. Why? Perhaps because Coca-Cola has successfully positioned itself not just as a beverage, but as an experience, a memory, a connection to happier times. For millions of people, Coca-Cola evokes childhood, family gatherings, summer days, first dates, celebrations. Or perhaps it's simply that Coca-Cola is genuinely good at what it does. The taste is consistent, the product is reliably available, the marketing is effective. In a complex world, there's something comforting about a product that never changes, that tastes the same everywhere, that meets expectations every time. Whatever the reason, Coca-Cola has achieved something rare in business. It has become more than a product. It has become a cultural institution woven into the fabric of modern life across the globe. Conclusion. The legacy. Final 8-10 minutes. From 9 drinks a day to 2 billion. Narrator. From a brass kettle in Atlanta to nearly 2 billion servings per day worldwide. From 9 drinks sold on that first day in May 1886 to annual revenue exceeding $40 billion. From a single soda fountain to operations in more than 200 countries. The numbers are staggering, but they don't fully capture what Coca-Cola represents. This is the story of American capitalism at its most effective and its most controversial. It's a story of brilliant marketing, relentless execution, global ambition, and the power of a brand to transcend its product. It's also a story of adaptation and survival. Coca-Cola has endured the Great Depression, World War II, the Cola Wars, the New Coke disaster, the rise of health consciousness, and countless other challenges. Through it all, the company has evolved while maintaining its core identity. The people who built Coca-Cola. Narrator. The history of Coca-Cola is ultimately a story about people. John Pemberton, the wounded veteran seeking relief from pain, who never lived to see his creation succeed. Asa Candler, the marketing genius who understood before almost anyone else that brands could be built through relentless advertising and promotion. Robert Woodruff, who led the company for 6 decades and transformed it from an American beverage into a global empire. Frank Robinson, who created the logo and name that would become recognized worldwide. The thousands of bottlers, truck drivers, salespeople, and factory workers who distributed and produced Coca-Cola in every corner of the world. The advertisers, artists, and marketers who created campaigns that entered popular culture, and the billions of consumers who chose, day after day, to spend their money on that familiar red and white bottle or can. The uncertain future. Narrator. What does the future hold for Coca-Cola? The challenges are real and significant. Soda consumption continues declining in developed markets. Health concerns show no signs of diminishing. Environmental pressures intensify. Younger consumers have different values and preferences than previous generations. Yet Coca-Cola has enormous advantages: unmatched brand recognition, global distribution, financial resources, and more than 130 years of experience navigating change. The company is adapting, diversifying beyond soda, reducing sugar in products, investing in sustainability, engaging with digital culture. Whether these adaptations will be sufficient remains to be seen. But if history teaches anything, it's that Coca-Cola should not be underestimated. This is a company that has survived and thrived through more than 13 decades of extraordinary change. It has proven remarkably resilient, remarkably adaptable. Perhaps in another 130 years, people will still be reaching for that distinctive bottle, still experiencing that familiar taste, still associating Coca-Cola with refreshment and simple pleasure. Or perhaps Coca-Cola will have transformed into something entirely different. A health beverage company, a sustainability leader, a brand so evolved from its origins that John Pemberton wouldn't recognize it. Only time will tell. Closing thoughts. Narrator. On May 8, 1886, when John Pemberton mixed coca leaves, cola nuts, sugar, and carbonated water in a brass kettle in Atlanta, he created something that would outlive him by more than a century. He created a beverage that would be consumed billions of times daily across the globe. He created a brand that would become one of the most recognized symbols on Earth. He created a product that would generate enormous wealth, provide livelihoods for millions, and become embedded in global culture. He also created something that would be blamed for contributing to obesity and diabetes, criticized for environmental damage, protested as a symbol of American cultural imperialism. Coca-Cola is all of these things: a refreshing beverage and a health concern, a beloved brand and a corporate giant, a piece of Americana and a global phenomenon, a simple pleasure and a complex cultural force. From that first glass served at Jacob's Pharmacy in Atlanta to the bottles and cans consumed today in nearly every nation on Earth, Coca-Cola's journey is intertwined with the story of modern capitalism, American culture, and globalization itself. Whatever the future holds, one thing is certain: the story of Coca-Cola, from a pharmacist's experiment to a global icon, is one of the most remarkable business stories ever told. This has been the history of Coca-Cola. The end.